I jumped at the feeling of a hand over my mouth. I thought I was dead, that eyeless Jack had come back to kill me for stopping him. But to my shock, I saw Jess with her index finger pressed against her pursed lips. My heart began to calm, my thoughts slowed, and I was able to relax. Jess was okay. She was safe, and the emotions I felt could not be put into words. I hugged her, and she hugged me. For a while we sat in silence. She was looking down, an expression of shame crossing her lightly tanned face. I didn't have to ask her what was bothering her. She felt bad for leaving me. She felt like she abandoned me to a killer and that she was a coward. But I didn't think so. I wanted her to run. She'd never understand it, and I knew anything I would say would only make her feel worse. If I told her I wanted her to run, she'd feel more cowardly. I finally spoke, more to break the silence than because I had something to say. How did you get into my window anyway? I mean, I'm on the 2nd floor. You had a ladder laying in your backyard, Jess said, avoiding eye contact. I mean, how did you open the window? It was locked, right? Locked? No, it wasn't. In fact, the window was wide open when I came in. I was about to object when we heard footsteps from the hallway. We both came to the same terrible realization and scrambled to our feet. I took my air rifle and Jess grabbed my Bible off the nightstand. What are you going to do? Rebuke him? I asked with a bit of laughter in my breath. Shut up. It's heavy enough to beat someone with. We made our way into the hallway, slowly opening the door and cautiously examining around the corners down the black hallway. Jess had asked me why Jack didn't just kill me, and I, having no real idea, said he must have known you'd come to me, and so he hid here. It did make some sense. I wasn't the only one he wanted, and Jess would only run if she found me dead. I just wished in that moment I knew our Slenderman had yet to come and save me. No one was in the hallway. Jess went to flick on the light, but I stopped her. It would be stupid to put on the light if Jack didn't know where we were, or maybe he could see in the dark. I didn't really think about the fact that we were fighting the one monster to ever keep me from sleeping. The creepypasta that terrified me to no end. I mean, a guy who ate people's organs while I slept? That's just horrifying on so many levels. At this point, Jack had the upper hand. We were scared and confused. He had planned all this. The only thing me and Jess could do was fight back. Be on the offense. Running was useless. We couldn't run forever, so we made our way from room to room. We opened doors, checked around corners, and looked for Jack. It's the one thing he wouldn't expect, an assault. While passing the whole closet, I heard a scraping sound against the door. Me and Jess looked at each other and then back at the door. I swallowed hard, slowly extending my arm to the knob. Jess lifted the book, poised to strike. The feeling of the cold metal on my hand made me shudder. I held my breath, my heart beating out of my chest. The knob had some resistance as I turned it. The light metallic click followed. I took a deep breath in, slowly let it out. I began opening the wooden door. Once it was about an inch open, I pulled hard, yanking it. It flew open, and then a skeleton popped out. Not an actual skeleton, but a plastic Halloween decoration. Jess started laughing and I sighed, pushing it back into the closet. I couldn't believe we had been so scared by a stupid hunk of plastic. I closed the door and suddenly, everything went silent. Jess stopped laughing. I couldn't hear my breath anymore. My heart had suddenly stopped. Eyeless Jack was there. Jess swung the book and missed. Jack grabbed her by the wrist and doubled her over with a punch. I swung the stock of the wooden air rifle high, catching Jack in his jaw. He stumbled back and clutched the spot that he was hit. His cheek was cracked like glass, and the same black liquid that was dripping from his eyes leaked from his shattered skin. Jess got up and started to run down the stairs. I fired a copper pellet at Jack's chest. I could hear her footsteps as they hit heavily on the wooden steps. Then they stopped. I looked to find her halfway down, looking back up at me. "What are you doing? Run!" I shouted at her. I can't leave you alone," Jess cried. She saw Jack begin walking in her direction. I started to fumble with the bolt on the rifle. "Go, I'll be fine. I'm never alone." She refused. Jack pulled a knife from his hoodie and kept walking, despite the metal that I shot at him. "I'm not scared of you," Jess scoffed, but her voice trembled. You bleed just like any other guy. You feel pain just like any other guy." I was about to shout at her again when she kicked hard between Jack's legs. I was a bit stunned at first, but I was even more surprised to see he didn't fall over. Jess took a step down the stairs, realizing she couldn't fight back. She tried to take another step, but she tripped and toppled down the stairs. I ran over, grabbing Jack by the arm and trying to wrestle the knife from him. He slammed the back of his head against my nose and I collapsed to the ground. A warm feeling trickled out of my nose and everything started to smell like iron. Eyeless Jack kept walking down to Jess, moving painfully slow. I'm sure he enjoyed it. I'm sure he relished every moment that we tried to fight. He enjoyed watching us realize we were powerless against him. I stood up, my hand over my nose. I coughed and felt like I was choking on my own blood. My head was swimming. My legs could barely hold me up. Everything felt warm in my face and cold at my fingers. I stumbled forward and put my body weight on Jack. I grabbed his wrist, pushing his arm close to himself, and let myself fall. The two of us fell down the stairs, our skulls cracking together and our bodies twisting in unnatural ways. Jess scrambled out of the way just in time for us both to hit the wall. Jack got back up. He was unstoppable, it seemed like, but the limp in his step gave me some hope. I saw his hand come down to my abdomen and I thought he was going to tear me open. Then, suddenly, my stomach felt warm and wet. I looked down, barely able to keep my eyes open. Jess screamed loudly, but I felt it more than I heard it. It felt like hot water was all over my face, running down my neck and pouring out of my stomach. My fingers had gone numb and my mind went black. I felt like I was fading away. After losing that much blood, everything seemed to just stop mattering. All my thoughts seemed pointless. I was starting to forget things like where I was or what time it was. Then, I started to forget more important things. My name, who stabbed me, who I was protecting. I remembered a girl, a pretty girl too. I remembered that I loved her very much. I was trying to stop something very bad from happening to her. She was in danger and it was somehow my fault. I put her at risk, and there was no one aside from me to help her. I couldn't remember her name, but I could make out her face, kind of. It kept changing between a lightly tanned girl with dimples and long pretty hair, or a pale girl with freckles, eyes filled with mischief, and several long cuts on her face. The names had faded, and now the faces were fading too. They both started to vanish from my mind, leaving cold, welcoming darkness. Then I heard a voice. It sounded as if it was right in my ear, loud, painfully so. It shouted at me to wake up. It shouted that I had to help Jess, that I couldn't let her die, just like I let it happen to her. Then I remembered it was my voice, and the girl I was protecting was Jess. I opened my eyes and looked to see Jack, limping over to Jess. She was throwing anything she could at him. It felt like hours had passed, but it looked like I was only out for a minute at the most. I couldn't move. All I could do was watch. Blood was filling my throat and I didn't have the energy to swallow or spit it out. It took all of my effort just to lift my hand to my stomach and press on the wound. Blood dribbled down my lips and my whole body stumbled forward. I tried to shout at Jack. I tried to curse him out, tell him to kill me instead, but all I could manage was a long moan. I was filled with rage, a rage that was suddenly and without warning boiled over. I felt like the anger of myself and another both in my mind. It was then I noticed the blackness starting to form before me. I managed a small smile, knowing what was to come next. Slenderman's body was there, standing stoically. Jess looked up at him, and Jack must have noticed because he turned to look up. Slenderman seemed to be silent and emotionless, but in my mind, I knew he was livid. He grabbed Jack by the head and dragged him out of the house. Jack's knife stabbed at his arm, but it didn't hurt my guardian at all. I wasn't able to see out the door, but when I closed my eyes, I could see it all in my head. Slenderman whipped Jack around his head, slamming him to the ground. Jack rolled onto his feet, leaping up and swinging wildly. Slenderman battered him away with a backhand slap. He followed it up with launching a tendril for Jack's face. Jack responded by cutting the tendril, which disappeared into shadows. Jack then threw his knife, hitting Slenderman in the chest. He grabbed the blade in his hand, making it seem like a toothpick in comparison to how tall he was. He crumpled the weapon into a ball of metal and broken plastic and dropped it. Jack must have not been scared because he put his fist up to continue fighting. Slenderman reached down to grab the eyeless killer. He brought his faceless face close to Jack's. The two of them had about the same amount of facial expression, so it was difficult to tell if either of them were wavering. Then, Jack's mouth opened. The skin around where his mouth would be shattered and his jaw moved, leaving a wide grin filled with jagged teeth. He bit Slenderman's face the same way the Rake had, only this time, Slenderman seemed to be in pain. He let go of Jack and swung his head around. Jack had stopped biting, but now he was held on by Slenderman's tie. When Slenderman reached for him, Jack bit his finger and ripped it off. The finger faded away into nothing like the tendril had, but it left Slenderman with a stump. It didn't grow back like the rest of him had. I could feel the pain myself, like I was the only one being bitten. Slenderman clearly had enough. Several long tendrils snaked from his back and grabbed Jack by his arms and legs. They all constricted, crushing Jack's bones and leaving him to scream silently in pain. When Jack was done squirming, Slenderman dropped him and stabbed his body several times over with the tendrils, one even poking into his eye socket out the back of his skull. It was done. Jack was dead, and I wanted to sleep. I had passed out shortly after Jack died. I woke up in the hospital. I'm sure they have a shortcut on their computers to admit me by now. I was given the usual pain medication and talk about how I would be able to go about normal life sooner than I would think. It was pretty empty words by this point. Slenderman was less and less reliable, and the burning in my finger reminded me that he wasn't invincible. By the time I went home a few days later, I could see him out my window. Once night fell, I called him over to my window and he came. "Where the hell were you?" I demanded. He looked at me, said nothing and simply walked away. I was speechless. He didn't even try to respond. "You know, you're kind of an asshole," I shouted after him. He shrugged in what seemed to be a sarcastic way before he continued walking. I went to my computer and sent Jess a message on Facebook. I hadn't talked to her since I was put in the hospital. This was the chat.